I mentioned earlier that one of the primary ways for improving your project would have been to focus more on the actual processes that you underwent, the actual experiences that you had, the struggles, the successes, the times when growth was just too fast and you couldn't keep up, and other times when it seemed to stagnate or perhaps hesitate. Another way that you could have improved the project, and that would have related to that, would have been to explore growth over the whole semester. I'm left after watching your documentary wondering, well, what happened in January and February? Was there no growing going on in those months? You see, by looking at growth over the long term, from January all the way through to the middle of April, you get a different perspective on growing processes than those processes of growth that happen just in the short term, such as the 3-week block. You get a different sense of tempo, a different rhythm of growth occurring over that longer term, and that too was not present in your project and would have enriched your project if you had explored it. A prime way to explore it would have been in your exploration of your professional growth. So you watching and trying to modify your use of language, that was something that was readily available to you over the 4-month span. You didn't need to work on that by any means, only in the 3-week block. And I would have been interested to hear about that over the long duration. Another thing that you mentioned in regard to your professional growth goal around the use of language and perhaps eliminating some types of language or some profanity, I was fascinated by your comment that you felt that it was lessened but not eradicated. So the use of shit maybe, or maybe fuck, I'm not sure what terms exactly you were working on, but that the quantity of them diminished but didn't disappear. That's really interesting to me in terms of growth, because it suggests, I don't know, maybe that growth is not about achieving a final success, totally eliminating the word fuck from my vocabulary so it never appears again, but instead that growth is about achieving moderate gains, achieving partial gains, and perhaps being satisfied with them. I think that that's the case often in teaching, that some of the really meaningful areas in which we want to grow, in which we want to change, are things that never will be completely eradicated, completely conquered in our lives as becoming a teacher, but instead that we grow in ways that help us live better with our flaws, perhaps live better with some of our weaknesses, but never eliminate them. And that living better is really, really important, I think. Learning how to live in such a way that some of our practices that we know could be other or could be different, could be better, at least we diminish the harm that they might cause to our students in one way or another. And that is a sufficient goal for growing. And that is actually a remarkable growth achievement. I'm standing in my garden, actually, and thought I'd show you just a couple of the plants in my garden. In the background, what you see, that's not garden, that's jungle. So where I live is out in the jungle, and that's one of the things I like about it, because when you listen, if I stop talking, when you listen, what you hear are the sounds of the jungle. Rather than human sounds, you hear the more than human. You hear the other than human. And that's a fine, fine sound. I've planted a couple of banana trees just down here. So I'll show you my banana trees. These are about 1 year old. Look at the size of the leaves on these things. Aren't those amazing? Huge leaves banana trees have. Maybe they'll offer some fruit in perhaps a year or so from now. By the way, can you see the one middle stalk coming up? That's a new leaf. So the leaves, when they're growing, the shaft is actually a leaf that's furled in on itself. And then what will happen is I'll come out one morning and suddenly that whole leaf will have unfurled into one of these huge ones. Quite an interesting process of growth for the leaves. Over here, there are some little yellow and red flowers that you can see just in there, hanging down. These are a delight to me. I think they're gorgeous. A few more of them hanging just here. You can see they hang almost like on a vine. These are their leaves. And the yellow and red is beautiful against all the greenery that's around here. These bluey purple flowers that you can see growing up there, those are on a vine as well. There's one of them, or a pair of them, just down in there. And there's another one here. These are called Morning Glory. And they are named that partly because each morning they come out with new blooms. And during the day they gradually wither. They fade in their color from this beautiful, to my eye, this beautiful, rich, deep, bluey purple. They fade to more of a deep pink color. And then they wither. And then the next morning, you get fresh new blooms. It's glorious. Look, if you will, at this tree up ahead in the center of the frame. The tall, grand tree. Can you see the size of it? Huge, huge. That shaft running up and then suddenly branching out in marvelous foliage and curls. Imagine the shaft, and then there's a taproot running down below. This tree tells us something about deliberate growth, doesn't it? Its strength, its main shaft running along as much of our deliberate growth seems to do. Part of what I like about this tree is that it says more than what we might immediately understand about deliberate growth. There's more to deliberate growth than the main shaft, the main root. Deliberate growth, this tree, teach us that growth is also parasitic and rhizomatic. To understand the parasitic, take a look at the foliage that you see up there. Some of the foliage is the foliage of the tree, but much of the foliage, for example, these pieces hanging on this elbow, those leaves on this elbow are parasitic. The tree's leaves are up above. Up above. These are parasites living on this tree. And deliberate growth always produces parasites. There are always parasites that latch themselves on to our efforts at deliberate growth. So deliberate growth ends up having unexpected partners. unexpected events arise, and sometimes they become even more consequential than the deliberate growth itself. In addition to the parasitic insight that this fine arboreal tree shows us, in addition to the parasitic, there's also the rhizomatic. Trees like this don't show us rhizomatic growth, they show us taproot sort of growth. But this tree doesn't exist apart from those vines that you see coming down, stringing down beside the main shaft of the tree. The vines are part of the growth of the tree, and the vines are rhizomatic.